Always take time to pause and reflect when Bearsack tasing her AP. It seemed as if time had nearly stopped. Everything was in super slow motion. My wife screams, and this man's desperate attempt to claw the bed and escape the taser that had effectively parted his testosterone production facilities and had surely bruised his undercarriage. It was during this time that I decided to look back on how it had all come to this point. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, time travel isn't a distant sci-fi fantasy anymore. No, it's a bona fide part of my everyday life, starting from the moment I discovered my wife's infidelity to the epoch-defining, testicle tasing event. So let's ride this emotional roller coaster back to where it all started. It was a Tuesday, a seemingly innocuous day, but anyone who's been burned by a Taco Tuesday gone wrong knows better. I was stuck at the office, neck deep in a marketing project that made less sense than a chimpanzee on rollerblades. Meanwhile, at home, my wife was presumably indulging in her usual hobbies, watching cooking shows, gardening, and apparently adding a dollop of infidelity to her afternoon tea. When I say it like that, it seems like the signs were there, but let me tell you, reality can be as stealthy as a ninja in a snowstorm. I'd had a nagging sense of unease for weeks, like a sixth sense that had suddenly woken up and smelled the coffee, except the coffee was my wife's adulterous escapades. The excessive number of times she said she was gardening, the sudden increase in her text messages, her phone always on silent, her abrupt gasps when I'd come home early. All classic signs of an affair, yet my brain refused to acknowledge it. On this fateful Tuesday, however, everything came crashing down. I had finally had enough of the cryptic marketing project and decided to come home extra early. Driving down our quiet suburban lane, I noticed an unfamiliar vehicle parked in our driveway. A sleek, red sports car, a far cry from my sensible family sedan. The type of car driven by men who use words like bro unironically. Suspicion clawed at my gut like a particularly aggressive raccoon, and I decided to investigate. I had a taser in my glove compartment, a remnant from a wild bachelor party that involved an unexpected run-in with a psychotic raccoon, hence my previous analogy. I grabbed it, feeling a grim sense of resolution. Walking into our house, I noticed that the usual, comforting smell of home had been replaced with a sickly sweet cologne, the kind men wear when they're trying too hard to impress. I crept up the stairs, each step creaking under the weight of my apprehension. My heart pounded in my chest like a particularly relentless EDM track, setting the rhythm for my dread. As I neared our bedroom, the unmistakable sound of betrayal reached my ears. My wife's voice, accompanied by a deeper, unfamiliar one. I threw open the door and was met with a sight that could give Hieronymus Bosch's paintings a run for their money. My wife, the love of my life, in bed with a man I'd never seen before. In that moment, anger overpowered shock, and I lunged towards the interloper. It was a moment that felt stretched across eons. Everything moved in super slow motion. My wife's screams, the man's desperate scramble to escape, my hand holding the taser, and then contact. The electricity arced, and the man convulsed violently, letting out a yelp that would have been comical under different circumstances. As the taser made contact with his delicate undercarriage, the howls reached an all-time high, oscillating between falsetto and a guttural moan. The sight was a chaos that could rival the fall of Rome. My wife had moved to the corner of the room, her eyes wide as saucers, clutching the bed sheet around her. This wasn't the wife I knew, this was a stranger. There was guilt in her eyes, yes, but also a certain fear. Not for herself, but for the man convulsing on our marital bed. The taser buzzed like a swarm of electrified bees. The air was thick with tension and the stench of scorched hair. I stepped back, still holding onto the taser, as the man curled up in a fetal position, whimpering and nursing his aching crotch. I was part disgusted, part astonished at the scene, as I glanced around the room that had just turned into a battlefield. Time seemed to come back in gear, moving at its normal pace again. The initial adrenaline rush began to fade, replaced by a dull, throbbing realization. My marriage was over. This man was just a symptom of a far deeper issue, an issue that had been simmering under the surface for a long time, unnoticed and unaddressed. I lifted my boot up in the air, and with a straight thrust kick, I launched his miserable body off of my bed and onto the floor. I went ahead and took my half-drank cup of grape juice that I had left on my bedside table and poured it all over his face. His eyes were wincing so tight in pain that he didn't even flinch when the liquid hit him. Now, in a quiet voice that echoed loudly in the sudden silence, my wife started to sob, stammering an apology. I didn't need her apologies, nor her excuses. This wasn't about her anymore, this was about me, and how I needed to move forward from this. All I could do was laugh. Not a hearty laugh, mind you, but a bitter, hollow laugh that echoed through the room and bounced off the walls. The kind of laugh that comes when life just kicked you in the nuts, ironically just like I'd done to this would-be Romeo. I didn't even say a word to her. I just turned around and walked out of the room, the echoes of my wife's pleas as well as AP's painful, aching moans following me down the stairs and out into the cool evening air. I got into my sensible sedan, leaving behind the screeching chaos and the unfamiliar red car. The taser, my newfound weapon of vengeance, sat heavy in my pocket as I drove off. A new chapter of my life had begun, a chapter in which I would learn to navigate the complexities of divorce, betrayal, and bear-sack tasing. But I had learned something valuable that day. Always pause and reflect. It may save you from a surprise or a shock. I'm not going to sit here and try to hide the fact that I was squirming uncomfortably for that entire story. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. When you subscribe, be sure to click the notification bell. Click here for more Tangled threads.